Hey guys, it's Matthew here once again, and I have taken to trying to make the revamped Static Strike work in a build. And to sum it up for you, I'm really not quite sure what this skill is, or how to do what I'm doing with it, or what anyone's doing with it. So this is just simply me still trying and making my best efforts at it, because it kind of feels like it's in a weird place. So Static Strike, when it got reworked, now gives you some static charges when you hit an enemy, up to 3 static charges which last 4 seconds, and then once you have those static charges they will simply just shock nearby things around you in an arc sort of fashion, but it hits multiple targets. So currently up to 5 beams, so it will shoot off 5 arcs. You can attach some chain to it, which I have with Touch of Anguish here, and you have to keep generating new stacks by hitting enemies, so it ends up being a similar fashion to Blade Vortex, where you get a stack, run at enemies, and then explode things accordingly. However, with Blade Vortex, you can just do those stack gaining whenever you want, wherever you want. With Static Strike, you specifically have to hit an enemy with your default-like attack, which just makes it feel a little bit awkward in that sense. So currently, the best way I've figured to do it is to use Ancestral Call to get 3 stacks instantly when you hit 3 separate enemies, and that does give you a much better sustain of your stacks of static, but that does of course take down your damage quite profusely, so it only really feels good up to the point where you have an overkill of damage, where you can then afford to run Ancestral Call full time to get over the fact that you are default attacking up close melee range with a name lock thing to get your stacks up. So then Ancestral Calling, you're getting several stacks every time you hit. You don't have to be entirely balls deep on an enemy to actually get that hit off, and then your stacks can actually do some good damage with the chaining method I've got through Touch of Anguish, with some increased area, which makes the beams go further, and then overall it starts to feel kinda good. So early on in leveling, it feels kinda good because you have an overkill of damage, and then later on in the mapping scene, it starts to feel good once you've geared your character up and have once again an overkill of damage. When you don't really have very good damage, that's when this skill just feels kinda crap and you're not sure what you're doing with it. So there is definitely a hurdle to get over where you don't quit and persist and eventually make something out of the skill. At this point of the skill, I am feeling pretty good with it. The mapping is really quite fluid. You can see what I've done here with Pathfinder, just a bunch of Fizz to LE conversion. A lot of good sustain from Pathfinder flasks, a lot of good LE damage, based entirely off Touch of Anguish, so there's nothing super expensive here except for the Lore Weave that I'm wearing, and then it does create a pretty fluid playstyle where you slap a few enemies and then run at them and do cause a lot of explosions. The single target is then somewhat respectable, which comes from just the default hits, which hit quite hard, and then you have the secondary beam action, which does a decent bit of damage. So at this point I'm at something like 1 million DPS, Shaper DPS with this skill. And then I've of course got a lot of extra damage with Vile War Chiefs and Vile Double Strike. The biggest problem will definitely be the fact that you are just default hitting things, and that feels kind of trash in a lot of boss encounters. For example, an Uber Elder, you never really want to be up close and personal, just default slapping a boss fight, especially when you have to dodge so many things. So we'll see how that progresses, but at this stage the DPS is pretty respectable and the skill doesn't feel too bad. Like I said, once you get to this level of, let's say, well-roundedness and gear for the character to actually work and function. So I'll show you how I built it and what the skill actually entails, and then we'll try and get to the next few levels in the next few days. So I want to go over the character itself, how I've built around it, and what Static Strike really is. Currently level 88 Pathfinder, which is called I Thought SS was a proj. I did originally start as a Deadeye because I thought the chain interaction would be really nice, but overall it's just straight up not worth it to get the additional chain with no additional damage gained from it, and the fact that you don't really stack too much attack speed in this build because that doesn't affect the beams. So I did spec back into Pathfinder because basically a strong flask setup with a strong LE to Fizz to LE conversion Pathfinder, you can't really lose, you can't really go wrong. Sub in any skill into this exact setup and you're probably going to have a decent amount of success, namely a nice Molten Strike track character would probably be the strongest possible shit in this setup, but that does mean you can make some other weaker skills or weirder skills definitely still work. And in this case, we're running with Static Strike. So 60% of your fizz gets converted to lightning. I'm converting the other 40% into cold. So then my damage split is quite a lot of lightning, quite a lot of cold, and it's 100% elemental. You then have a strong base of 143% per damage base, and you just default melee slap shit, which, like I said, can be pretty awkward. You then have a bunch of random beam shit happening. So the base duration of your beams are 4 seconds, and there is a Helm enchant that you can get, which will be 45% duration, and to be honest, probably better than my Helm enchant, at least for the feel of the skill and the sustain, but you can then scale duration throughout the tree and gems and stuff to make it feel better as well. Base duration is 4 seconds, and every time you hit something, you gain 1 stack of Static Strike, and then you zap things around you, 5 beams max, and that it is affected by chain, which is why we're running 2 Touch of Anguish so that we have 2 chains, and you can see that throughout the little clips that I posted, that every time you hit, there will be some chains branching off and doing some pretty nice damage. That paired with Herald of Ice means that your clear isn't that bad, and you can even factor in something like an Impulsor in the end, just so you can get some real dirty clear happening, but I felt like that was kind of just a bit overkill and a bit cheating to really highlight the strength of the skill itself. So you have up to 3 stacks. You do gain a bit of beam damage as you're running, but for the most part, you kind of want to be standing still and attacking against single target because you are otherwise sacrificing quite a bit of damage to not straight up hit things, and the additional beam damage while moving is just an extra perk while you actually have to be on the move. So that's basically what's happening there, and it's kind of awkward, but kind of fun in the end if you can get it built the right way, with the right gear and all of that. Currently, I'm running Static Strike, early damage with attacks, Ancestral Call, melee fizz, and increased area of effect. Now, up until a certain point, you don't really feel like you can do Ancestral Call because, like I said, it reduces your damage quite a lot. First of all, it reduces the damage by 16%, but it also takes up an entire gem slot, which in this case would be damage on full life, which is what I'm running. So there's a huge amount of damage reduction, roughly half, by doing Ancestral Call, but it does make your stacks and your gameplay a lot smoother, so you have to pretty much do it if you want to feel good about clearing, and that means you have to reach this level of damage where it actually feels good to use. So crit and some fairly slower weapons like the Touch of Anguish ends up feeling good once you can scale them well enough. A slow two-hander can work as well, which is typically, I think, what people have been trying to build around. Likewise with, let's say, a Void Forge or so, but it might feel a bit clunky actually getting your swings in when you attack that slow, and it'll only really feel good once you have the stacks going and then run around beaming things. So this is the way I've chosen to build because chain feels absolutely necessary on the skill to actually have some good clear. Without chain, it does feel kind of shite, and I definitely question whether or not it's worth using if you don't have any chain. And on top of that, increased area makes the beam range a lot better, so it feels good to get any sort of area in the build, but in this case I'm running the area gem itself because I can't really get it anywhere else, and then I sub in increased area for Ellie Focus on single target. And in the end, we're looking at currently 770,000 Shaper DPS with 2 Touch of Anguishes, and that is, of course, with Ellie Focus and melee fizz and damage on full life and Ellie damage with attacks. So no Ancestral Call, no area of effect, 770 damage from the pure melee hit. You then have 3 beam stacks, which do an additional 300k. So we are just a bit over 1 million damage Shaper DPS, and then factor in your Vaal Warchief, your Vaal Double Strike. It can put out some good damage, but like I said, that's more of a product of just this way of building a Pathfinder. Strong amount of physical damage into Ellie conversion, bit of flat fizz everywhere, bit of Ellie damage to attacks wherever you can, and all of a sudden you got yourself a strong ass build for damage. And Static Strike is not really anything too special in that regard. Molten Strike would be a lot better, Blade Flurry would be a lot better, but it does hold its own, and it is kind of a fun skill because, like I said, it's kind of like a Blade Vortex, charge it up a bit, run at some enemies, bloof. So the gear itself should be pretty straightforward to look at, just your usual suspects, the Stark Onger, the Law Weave, couple of Socket Tomb Fists, Crafted my own boots for some resists and life and all that. Resist life. Flat fizz is kind of the biggest damage gain for us, so a steel ring's pretty nice. Got ourselves a gate amulet with some physical as extra lightning. Physical as extra cold is good too. Flat fizz, crit multi, and then found a belt that's pretty nice, but couldn't sell, so I just decided to freaking use it. And I did triple balance my wise oak. As always, it's a bit of a headache. It takes about 30 minutes worth of sussing out gear. Eventually, once you do it, it is very worth it. So if you're unfamiliar with triple balancing a wise oak, it means that I get 15 pen to each of my elements, and then also 10 reduced LE damage taken to each of my elements. And that paired with the fact that we are running Law Weave means we have 80 max res, 12% reduced LE damage taken because Flask Effect works on that, which you get from little nodes down here. So 12% reduced LE damage taken, another 6% reduced LE damage taken here. Stack it up with your Pantheons, and all of a sudden you are actually a very beefy LE damage taken character. So that's something to keep in mind for a lot of these later delve levels where pathfinders like this can be very strong. The life total is nothing too impressive at this point. I'll probably try and hit about 5k, and that's still not much, but it should be enough to take on most things because we are so beefy on this character. With the damage reduced and the amount of damage I deal, and then as well as that, life gain on hit from your claws. With the static strike is actually very strong, so that's quite a lot of sustain and quite a lot of defense through my various defensive mechanics. And then lastly, if you're going to go pure single target for this sort of thing, a claw like this, which I just managed to roll in a few hundred ults yesterday, so strong fizz, bit of extra fizz as cold, and then I'm going to mastercraft it so that it's got multiple mods, get some fizz, some attack speed, some crit, and all of a sudden you'll be looking at about a 280 physical DPS claw, which is just a bit better than Touch of Anguish, but it is faster and it will have an extra 40% cold, so like a bonus hatred. So running something like this or just a pure fizz claw instead of these for single target will gain me another 20-30% damage, and you won't really need chains for your Uber Elders or your single targets. So that's when I can sub these in for pure business single target if I want, or I'll actually play around with just having one Touch of Anguish and one strong claw otherwise. For now, guys, I'd say that's all I need to say for the skill. I still got to do a bit more exploring into deeper delves and higher bosses. At the moment, I'm going to say Static Strike is tentative at best to use, and the fact that delve exists is the only reason the skill doesn't suck total balls, is going to be my opinion, because the delve action, those thin corridor tunnels, really does suit this playstyle quite well because you don't have super amounts of area, and it does mean you can shock and freeze a lot of things and get some actual decent clear going. If it was just plain open maps and all that, Static Strike would be nothing too impressive. A Wild Strike would clear a lot better, but at this point, delve does exist and Static Strike isn't too bad for those purposes, but it's probably not the best rework or new skill coming out there. It is kind of fun if you can get it to the level that I've got it to. So just, bit of a word of caution that you won't feel too good on this skill until you have all the good shit ramped. And I definitely want you to kind of know what you're doing before you jump into something like this. Or you can take a completely different approach, not go Pathfinder, do a bunch of other ascendancies like other people have done, and maybe have more success. But for now, guys, that's all I'll say about this character. I will hopefully have another video following up for the end game in the next few days. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.